Very excited for our Funtivity this afternoon and evening, depending on where you are dialing in from. Feel free to let us know in the chat where you are at. I'm super excited today to be inviting Mariah Gladstone, Blackfeet Cherokee, who grew up in Northwest Montana, tonight to lead us in an IndigiKitchen cooking demo. One of the reasons why I'm so excited to have Mariah here today is because she has a cooking show that's actually dedicated to helping us re-indigenize our diets using foods native to the Americas. IndigiKitchen gives viewers the important tools they need to find and prepare food in their own communities. Beyond that, it strengthens the ties to our cultures and reminds us of the inherent worth of our identities while fueling our physical bodies. So I'm really excited, without further ado, to turn it over to Mariah, who's going to be walking us through making dal and wild rice and sunflower maple cookies. And if you had a chance to grab the ingredients, I'm sure you will love to cook along. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now and go ahead and pass it over to you, Mariah.
Hi, guys. Super excited to be here with you guys today. Hopefully we get to have a fun cook along if you got a chance to get the ingredients. If you didn't, no worries. I'm sure you guys have access to this recipe. And if this looks like something fun that you'd like to try later, you're certainly welcome to do that on your own time. I see at least one person is in their kitchen. Super exciting. So I'll detail a little bit of what I do, but before that, I do want to get started cooking the wild rice and the lentils because they're going to take the longest. So just to make sure that we have time for everything, I'm going to actually just get my rice cooker started with a cup of wild rice and 3 cups of water. If you don't have a rice cooker, totally okay. You can obviously do this in a little pot on your stove and try to cover it if you can. Someone said they're not able to hear me. Okay, it's not across the board, so that's probably something on their end. Hopefully we get it figured out. So what was I saying? 1 cup of water, sorry, 1 cup of wild rice, 3 cups of water. If you want to add a little bit of oil, you can do that just so it'll keep things from sticking. We're just going to add that and then turn it on simmer with a lid until the water has been absorbed by the wild rice. You'll notice that's a pretty big water to rice ratio. I make wild rice a lot of the times with a 4-to-1 ratio, but we're going to keep it a little bit more firm today, but it will absorb a ton of water. I love working with wild rice. It's not actually a true rice in that it's not related to the rice that's native to Asia, but it's actually a grass seed that grows in wetland areas around the Great Lakes region. And so the process, which wild rice was originally traditionally, but it's still today harvested, is actually done in canoes. So there's 2 people teams that will go out and harvest wild rice, and they'll go out in canoes. One person will use a long pole to essentially push the canoe through the water by pushing off the bottom of the wetland. And they'll go into these big, tall rice stands, and another person will use another pole to shake the grass seeds into the bottom of the canoe. So the canoe will fill up with grains of grass seed. But of course, in this process, you also get a lot of grass seed that doesn't fall in the canoe and ends up falling in the water outside. And so it is through this process of harvesting that you also help the plant reseed itself and encourage future generations to grow. This harvesting practice encourages more wild rice to proliferate and helps feed the birds and the other animals that rely on this food source as well. Unfortunately, wild rice, due to both climate change and a lot of waterfront development, has been threatened because a lot of people want nice, clean access to the water without having to wade through big stands of rice or grass. So it's a thing that I like to encourage people to learn more about because it introduces you to a really cool, new, delicious food, but also it helps preserve this ancestral food of people in the Great Lakes region. And it makes a wonderful high protein accompaniment to the dish that we're going to be making. So I'm going to get that started.
While Mariah is getting that started, is there anyone else here who is cooking along? Don't be shy, let me know. And
I'm cooking along, Alexandra.
You know, I was just about to pick on you. Thanks for raising your hand.
Of course. I even sent you a picture of my setup.
Oh my gosh. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and showcase you right now. Let me see if I can spotlight for everybody. All right. Can everyone, let me see. Let's see your setup, Anne.
Let's see. I've got all of my ingredients here on the counter. I am ready to go. I am using this as an opportunity to make dinner for my family. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Great. Now, if I can figure out how to unhighlight you, 1 second here. I'm learning this stuff.
Remove spotlight.
Okay. Let me see here. Remove. Yeah, this is something exciting here. I'm getting to be a Zoom. Okay, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and pin Mariah again.
So I hope I didn't miss it, Mariah. We're supposed to be cooking the rice and the lentils now, or just the rice?
Separately, but yes, I'm starting the rice. I just got that started. I'm about to start the lentils too.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything.
No, we're good. We're good. I went into a wild rice spiel and didn't even start talking about lentils. And yeah, Mary, I think that the recipe will be sent out or has been sent out. Someone else has the details on that.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes, there it is in our partner brief on slide number 27. I just put the link in the chat window. Is there anyone else who wants to try to spotlight their setup? Is anyone else cooking along? Anne, can I come over for dinner?
Sure, it might take you a while, but
Ooh, okay.
I'd love to have you.
Okay.
I don't want to be spotlighted, but I am cooking along in my
Yay.
kitchen and excited.
Awesome. You'll have to post pictures of your finished product in Discord.
Crisis. Okay. So I'm gonna put my lentils on to cook. It's gonna actually be the same proportion, trying to keep things real simple for you guys. So a cup of lentils and 3 cups of water. We are gonna make sure that we're gonna rinse our lentils before we put them in our pot to simmer. You could make lentils in a rice cooker, though obviously most people don't have 2 rice cookers, though some people have like Instapots and other things that we can use as rice cookers, but I'm gonna make mine on the stove. We're also, it doesn't quite get rid of all of the water, so we do have to drain a little bit of water off at the end as well. But we're gonna put those on to cook. Lentils are not indigenous to North America, but they are a really great pulse crop and they grow really well in Montana. So I'm able to get a nice local source of lentils from Timeless Lentils. And if you've ever read the book, The Lentil Underground, I highly recommend it. If you're looking for good, rebellious, regenerative, agricultural reading, Lentil Underground is a great book. So I like these pink lentils. I think they turn into really delicious, soft, really nice textured lentils. And I think that they're super mild in their flavors. They can be incorporated into this. There's a pumpkin soup that I'll make with lentils that's really good. So that works as well. And this lentil, I know Timeless Lentils has a recipe for it on their website. They actually have a lentil brownie recipe made with their pink lentils. So lentils have a lot of great uses and they're wonderful legumes. So the crop itself is great because it hosts nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil, which of course help pull the nitrogen out of the air and fix it in our soils to grow strong, healthy soils that we can then use to feed other plants. So one of the best legumes, well, I can't say best legumes. but one of the best known legumes that's native to North America is, of course, all of the things that we have within the bean family. All of these beans that were traditionally grown are awesome and, of course, great nitrogen fixers. So while I'm using lentils, you could probably substitute beans. They just take a lot longer to cook. So I thought it'd be best to use lentils in this recipe. People love lentils. So I'm going to rinse these off, put them in my pot with a 3-to-1 ratio of water to lentils. I'm going to get them simmering, and then I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the importance of beans, even though it's not what we're doing right now. So one of the best plant partnerships that is probably familiar to a lot of people, especially if you garden or read any type of gardening books, is the Three Sisters, which was common across a lot of different Indigenous nations, but it was this sustainable method of polyculture planting that was practiced by planting the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash together. So there was a couple different reasons this was important and this balance of plants. So of course, if you've grown corn, beans, and squash, you probably know that they grow in very different ways. Corn, of course, is going to grow tall, straight up into big corn stalks. Beans need something to hang on to. You look at your pole beans, and they have to hold on to something or else they'll flop all over and be generally on the ground, rotting. And of course, your squash spreads out and takes over a large area. This works really well when you plant them together because your beans can grow up your corn. They can hang on to your corn, keep them nice and strong, give them a nice support system, while your squash spreads out on the ground. It kind of shades the rest of the ground from the other weeds that might come up, so it prevents anything else on the ground from getting a lot of sunlight. And we of course know that the beans are nitrogen fixers, so they're able to help give some of the nutrients to the soil that the other plants need. And the squash have those little hairs on their squash leaves and branches, stems, that kind of prevent some pests that might munch on all of the plants from crawling around. They don't like all those hairs touching them. So that helps. But together they kind of create this awesome trifecta. They work really well, of course, physically, but chemically, as well as in our own diets, because corn, beans, and squash form a complete protein. So you're able to get all of your essential amino acids, you're able to get all those nutrients by eating corn, beans, and squash together. And of course, there are tons of variety of corn, beans, and squash. So it's really cool to look at some of that as part of this as well. Sometimes lentils have a tendency to stick together, so I'm just kind of making sure that these are all broken up before I put them onto the stove to simmer. And I'm just going to turn them on like a medium-low heat right now. We'll just let them simmer. And then we have a lot of fun times to cut stuff up. So I have medium tomato, like a really large onion. Probably should aim for about the same size of tomato and onion. I might only use half of this because it's so big. Use that. I have some, oh, I didn't even put garlic in my recipe. Never mind. We don't need garlic. Might put some in anyway if you have any. I was like, oh, I didn't put garlic in my recipe for you guys. My bad. But I do have ginger. I have the largest piece of ginger on earth, so we only need a little bit of fresh ginger. So I'm gonna take my knife out. It's funny, I was telling you guys about the three sisters and corn, beans, and squash, even though we're not using any of those things in this recipe, but I do love talking about cool Indigenous wisdom and fun regenerative ag knowledge. I didn't even go into like these mound systems of planting where these three sisters were traditionally planted, which is interesting because now there's a lot of research demonstrating how essential that is to moisture preservation. It helps reduce evaporation from the soil and helps maximize the water intake from the plants by really containing that in a mound. It's really cool stuff. None of it has to do with our recipe today right now, but that's okay. We do have a lot of cool Indigenous foods that we are going to be using for our recipe. So I have a pepper. This is actually an Anaheim pepper because all the jalapenos at the grocery store looked terrible. And because it's snowing in the ground, my pepper plants are not growing any peppers yet. They're just little starters in the basement. So I'm going to use an Anaheim pepper, but you guys might have gotten serranos or jalapenos. Doesn't matter, it's gonna change the spice level of this dish. Yes, snow. It was great. It was like 75 degrees. We worked in the garden all day, got sunburnt, and then there was a winter storm warning for 3 days, and it dropped like a foot of snow, which was bad for my sunflowers, and I don't want to talk about it. Peppers are cool. Peppers are all from Central America. They're really cool, awesome indigenous food. There's, of course, hundreds of varieties of peppers. You guys probably know quite a few of them. I'm sure there are hundreds we don't know, but you guys have seen those posters in Mexican restaurants with your varieties of peppers. It's actually an interesting story why we call this fruit peppers, and it has to do with our favorite lost explorer, Christopher Columbus, who of course showed up and he's like, I'm looking for India. You guys are all Indians, right? This must be India, which is a whole other thing. But of course he showed up thinking he was in India looking for spices and found something spicy. And he's like, this must be pepper. And of course it was not like black peppercorn like he was actually looking for. It was just these different varieties of chilies and they were spicy. And dude bro didn't know what he was looking for. So now all of these are called peppers, even though not all of them are spicy. That doesn't have anything to do with peppercorn. So Indians and peppers, we have something in common. Thanks, Columbus. So complicated misnomers. Oh, I did put garlic in my recipe. I lied to you guys. I'm sorry. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get started cutting a whole bunch of this stuff up. I'm going to just cut up my onion. I wish I had good tips for you guys for cutting onions, but the best tip I can tell you is try to avoid separating the roots from the onion until the last second, because that will prevent the onion from starting to bleed, which is what makes you cry. I'm using a yellow onion, which is a species that's native to the Old World. So Europe, Asia species of onion, but we know that there are tons of varieties of onions that grow wild all over the world. And so if you have fresh onions or locally foraged onions or whatever kind of onion you like and that is available to you locally, sustainably. However, use that type of onion because they're all going to have that similar onion flavor and they'll all work in this recipe. So don't get too hung up on yellow onion versus red onion versus green onion versus ramps versus wild onions, whatever. Use whatever you want. So I'm just going to, as I said, this is a pretty large onion, so I'm just going to cut this guy like this. Keep little roots on that part. And we're just going to dice this up. You don't have to get too fancy. Pieces for my compost pile. Should have sharpened my knives before this. All right. Just making a pile of delicious, fragrant vegetables to be part of this dish. It's funny how dal and the recipe that I'm making is, of course, so central to cuisine in India, in the Himalayas, of course, Nepal and India especially have a lot of dal. It's a recipe that is from that region, and that's, of course, lentils are your most important ingredient in an actual dal, but so many of these other things are indigenous to this part of the world. Of course, I mentioned chilies. Any kind of that spicy chili flavor is coming from something that was originally bred and cultivated by people in Central America. Of course, your tomatoes are indigenous to this part of the world. Tomatoes are another nightshade. It's funny how tomatoes became such this like key food associated with Italians. But of course, tomatoes are a New World food, and Italians didn't have tomatoes until Columbus brought them back. Tomato seeds and tomatoes, right? Just like the Irish became so associated with potatoes, and of course, potatoes are also from the New World. They're from South America. There's something like 10,000 varieties of potatoes, and they were all cultivated for different reasons. It's actually interesting looking at some of the research about Machu Picchu in the Andes and the terraces that were built. And there's some interesting research that folks say is that wasn't a temple, it wasn't like some type of religious location. It was actually just like an agricultural test site to see what things grew at those different elevations and to really examine, you know, quinoa cultivation and potato cultivation and these different foods that were grown in the region. And of course, things grow for different seasons and they grow for different lengths of time, and all of these really interesting things that the Incan people learned about potatoes is really, really incredible. We know, of course, like sweet potatoes, yams, and like a couple varieties of white potatoes, right? But there's so many varieties. And it's interesting also this knowledge that goes along with potatoes, because they had a way of preserving potatoes that the folks in the region, like, who was it? It was Pizarro, I think, that sailed around and went abusing Incan people up and down the coast there. But they took these potatoes back, or they took them on their boats, and they were like, these potatoes aren't great. They don't keep for very long, right? Because the potatoes would go moldy and start rotting, and they'd be like, these potatoes are terrible. We hate them. Also, Europe had a thing against root vegetables. They were considered peasant food for a long, long time. And so potatoes were really not in. But because you can produce more potatoes per land area than you can wheat, or in terms of calories, there was a lot of lords and royalty that actually started banning in-home ovens. So people weren't able to bake their own bread in Europe for a while. And they only had like a community oven, like in the center of your little village, and you can reserve the community oven once a week. So families could only bake bread once a week, which is basically royalty's way of forcing the peasants into eating potatoes instead of all this wheat, which was fascinating. Doesn't have anything to do with my original story, which was about the methods of Incan potato preservation, which was actually utilizing that freeze-thaw cycle that you get really high elevations in the mountains, right? Nice and sunny, it thaws out during the day, but at night, temperatures are frozen, right? This is the fall, right after you've harvested your potatoes. And so during the daytime, things are all thawed out, and you could go and you could just smash the crap out of your potatoes. And so all your liquid comes out of your potatoes. You're basically making like mashed potatoes, but with raw potatoes, or I guess you could do it with cooked potatoes too, but with raw potatoes. And then at night, all of that smashed potatoes freeze. And so then first thing in the morning, you have all this ice on top of your frozen potatoes. So you go and you take all your ice off, which takes the water away, right? Next day, you keep smashing them. You gradually smush that water out of your potatoes and pull it off as frozen ice chunks. And after a week or so, you have like freeze-dried potatoes that can be packed, basically like your little instant mashed potatoes, your little potato flakes, which are just dehydrated potatoes. That's what Incan people would do. So they could take potatoes on long runs, super lightweight, high calorie food, and they would be preserved for years this way. And so, of course, Pizarro was like, we don't like these potatoes, right? They don't keep that long. It's like, well, we got methods. I like that story. So I have a whole bunch of I have my onions cut up, got those right there. I'm going to cut up my Anaheim pepper. Anaheim peppers are, of course, what famous green chilies are. Right? If you go to New Mexico, you get New Mexico green chilies. That's what we have. And of course, so many varying degrees of spiciness in your peppers. I'm trying to grow a whole bunch of fun peppers this year, but also I live in Montana, and peppers like the heat, so we'll see how that goes. I'm just taking the seeds out of here, and then I'm just going to cut these up. I normally do this recipe with a jalapeno, as I mentioned, but I was having some issues. If you're doing a jalapeno and you want it spicy, you can just cut right down the jalapeno and keep the seeds in. There's no problem at all with that. So I'm not trying to cut these into too small of chunks. Just go right down this. Just making sure I don't have any little end bits in there. And then I'm gonna, let's see, I'll mince up my garlic. I hit a garlic clove somewhere, I'm not sure where. So for your garlic cloves, let's see, the best way. So for your garlic cloves, of course, there's different strategies for taking the papery part off your garlic cloves. I'm sure some of you guys have garlic hacks with a big thing of already minced garlic, totally fine. But if you do have an actual garlic and you're trying to get the cloves off, I would take the flat side of your knife on the top of your garlic clove and smash it, because this has a great advantage. One is you get the paper off real fast, but also it's essentially like you just ran your garlic through a garlic press. And so you can just take that little end bit off real fast, and the rest of this is ready to be minced, and it has all that flavor in it. So that's great. I have my wild rice steaming away behind me. Got my lentils on the stove. And I'm just gonna go through this and smash my cloves of garlic. So there is a wild variety of garlic called ransom that works. It's kind of like a woody. So wild garlic works in this, but I'm making this real easy for you guys. I'm not trying to get too complicated. Ginger is, of course, not indigenous to North America. It's an awesome root. It has a great flavor. It has great digestive properties. So it's great to incorporate within this. And also because ginger can be grown and harvested sustainably. And some of the other spices, of course, are also not indigenous to this continent, but we're going to use them in our recipe because a lot of our base foods are indigenous to this continent. We're grown here sustainably. So it's funny, I use a lot of wild game or wild fish in some of my recipes because, as I said, I live in Montana and that's what I have easy access to. But I think it's cool to be able to put together awesome recipes that are packed full of flavor, that are packed full of protein and nutrition that don't have meat in them as well. And I think it's cool to remind people that so many of these foods that have been incorporated into cuisines around the world, like tomatoes, like peppers, have their origins on this continent. I think give my lentils a little stir. They're looking awesome. They were trying to do a weird bubble thing. Okay, so I got lentils, ginger, sorry, I have lentils, I have onion, pepper, garlic, and I'm going to cut off a little piece of this giant thing of ginger. If you ended up buying a thing of ginger root for this, awesome. You're probably not going to use the entire thing that you bought. So feel free to just cut it up. You can leave its little skin on like that and throw it into like a pot of water on your stove and make yourself some ginger tea because that's the best. You can sweeten your ginger tea with a little bit of maple syrup if you have. Or honey. Raw honey is also great for ginger tea. So there's a couple of methods of dealing with your peel on your outside of your ginger when you're cooking with it. One is obviously to gently try to just take off the peel with a knife. You'll lose a little bit of ginger that way. So if your ginger is at a premium, you can just take a spoon, just a regular teaspoon, and you can scrape that peel right off. And that's pretty gentle, especially if your ginger is like really knobby. it can just help to go around it with a teaspoon instead of trying to cut around it, taking off a lot of your actual edible ginger part. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with that peel. It's just a weird papery texture that you don't want in your food. So just have a little knot there. I've never tried planting one of these ginger roots, but I know there is a method to plant the ginger root and to grow your own little ginger plant from it. So I guess you could look that up too. And then I'm just going to cut this ginger up into little bitty pieces. So I'm just mincing it, just like I minced the garlic. And I'm almost done just cutting up random things. Okay. I love ginger. I would not be mad if I found a large chunk of ginger in my meal, but some people might. So just chop that until you feel like that's the right consistency. Last thing we need to do is we are just going to, let's see, slide that up. I'm just accumulating everything on my cutting board here. Just going to cut up my tomato. So just make sure that we cut off our little stem piece here. But the rest of the tomato is good to go in. If you're someone that cans a ton of tomatoes and you wanted to use canned tomatoes, that would work too. Nothing wrong with that. I have Cherokee purple tomato plants that have been growing from seed, sitting on the windowsill right now. Super excited about them. Hoping they're going to turn into awesome tomatoes and I get to can them in the fall. I've never tried growing Cherokee purple tomatoes. Of course, I was starting a whole bunch of seeds for people and I'm like, oh, what kind of tomatoes do you want? And people are like, cherry tomatoes or beefsteak tomatoes, or like these like really like basic varieties of tomatoes. And I'm like, no, I want to grow like cool, like yellow pear tomatoes and these stripy ones that are called sunrise bumblebee. Like all of these just chaos varieties of tomatoes. So I'm what the difference with them. So I have like a few cherries and beefsteaks, and also take this other one and tell me how it is. So I have a lot of tomato plants started. Last year, a hailstorm wrecked all of my tomatoes, but they all grew back. So if they can handle that, they can handle anything. So I'm dicing these up. They're going to be mushy. They're going to fall apart. That is our eventual goal of them. So don't get stressed if they don't end up in like cute cubes or anything. Smash them. Let's see. Someone said something in the chat, but I can't read it because my hands are covered in tomato juice. Okay, washing up my hands. My lentils at this point are done cooking, but I'm just turning them on low heat. I'll drain off the water in just a second and see what people are asking in the chat. You guys are so active in the chat. Someone grew some Cherokee purples and they were delicious. That's good to hear. Freeze ginger, yes. People love ginger tea. How can you not love ginger tea? Lentil brownie recipe. Yes, look that up. It's on Timeless Lentils website. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. And then they said they tried the black bean brownies. I've never tried black bean brownies, but I do have a recipe on my website for a white bean coffee cake that's grain-free. So consists of sticking basically cooked canned white beans. There you go. Thank you. The lentil recipe is now in the chat. It's basically sticking like lentils, eggs, and like a little bit of coconut flour. And I think it's sweetened with just maple syrup and honey. I haven't made it in a while, but stick that in a blender and you make a really delicious coffee cake out of it. It does not taste like there are beans in it. So it's really fun to bring to parties and have people eating them and go, hey, there are beans in there. Because I'm not the hugest fan of bean texture because I kind of think they're chalky sometimes. So I just create a whole bunch of ways to make beans taste minimally like beans. As cool as I think they are, I've had to teach myself to like them because I was a picky eater growing up. But the crumble for that is made of maple sugar and walnuts. But for people that are allergic to nuts, we made them with just candied sunflower seeds. So that was awesome. Oh, pinto bean cake. There you go. Sounds wild. Cool. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to get us started with this. So I have a pan on the stove, and we're just going to use that pan to cook everything down here, get that flavor coming out. So I'm just going to put about a tablespoon of oil in my pan. And you can use just about any type of oil here. I'm gonna use a light olive oil. I use sunflower seed oil or avocado oil on a lot of my recipes if I'm trying to do only indigenous ingredients. But olive oil is a great healthy oil, and a lot of people have it in their kitchens. So just try to avoid vegetable oil. I'm gonna let my oil heat up for just a second, and then I'm going to add my onions, and I'm gonna start cooking those down. When my onions are just about cooked, so you know they'll start getting translucent, we're just gonna keep moving the onions around. I'll add my onions and my peppers first, and then I'll add my ginger and my garlic and the rest of my spices. And so we'll kind of temper them within the oil while the onion gets to absorb all the flavor of all of those. And then the last thing we'll add are all of our spices, our tomatoes. And then that will cook down until the tomatoes are kind of falling apart. Somewhere in there, we'll drain the lentils, and then we'll just add everything together into the lentil pot. I normally salt this recipe at the end of the recipe. I think salt makes it taste really good, helps bring out all of those other flavors, but I just let people do that when I serve them because some people are also like, I don't want salt on this. My partner doesn't always like a ton of salt, so we can put it on there. I do, but it's not necessary to this dish. There's so many other flavors going on. So I'm gonna add my onions and my peppers. I just kind of gave you guys chaos instructions, so I will just repeat what I'm doing as I'm doing it. I'm gonna turn this over here. You guys are able to see what's happening on this front. We're obviously just trying to make the onions nice and soft so we don't have crunchy bits in our meal. I'm trying to pull those flavors out of there as we're sauteing them. And when my camera kicked off and kicked me out of the meeting for a second, I did go and grab the spices that I'm going to need. So I have paprika and cumin, and what did I grab? Turmeric and cinnamon is what I grabbed. So that's what I have. And it's interesting, most of those spices are, of course, from the old world, spice trade spices. But paprika is actually dried bell peppers that have been ground up. So paprika is an indigenous spice. I'm going to take my lentils and I'm going to drain that excess water off of them right now. Gotta say, not a lot of excess water on my lentils.
I was just going to ask you, what is the best way to get excess water off the lentils without losing all the lentils? I'm always losing them.
So I literally took the corner of my strainer and I pressed it up against the pot so that it could kind of just drain through the strainer. That's what I did. I don't know what your straining setup is, but that might work. Or you could use like, I would just have it on low heat. You just let your water cook off. It's fine if there's a little bit more moisture in there. You're good. It'll be okay.
Have you added the tomatoes yet or no?
We'll add the tomatoes at the end. So if you've already added if your onions have cooked down, they're nice and soft, then you can add your spices, your garlic, your ginger. You can add that and then cook that into it for like 2 minutes or so.
I'm sorry if I missed it. Did you say how much of each spice?
So I have it on the recipe. That's why I didn't say it.
Oh, sorry. I will pull up the recipe. My fault.
No worries. Half a teaspoon of cumin, half a teaspoon of cinnamon. You could even do a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon. You don't have to go cinnamon crazy on this. Half a teaspoon of turmeric, half a teaspoon of paprika. Make it real simple. Try to make this real easy for you guys so it wouldn't be too crazy. All right, so my onions are just about cooked here. So I'm going to add spices in. I'm just a rebel that's not going to measure. So I'm just estimating here. It's like, what's the consequence of overdosing on turmeric? You just start like sweating orange. Probably, I think that's happened before. Your cinnamon's probably going to be your strongest spice. So as I said, you can tone that one down a little bit. adding my ginger and my garlic at this point as well. If you're not cooking along, you should be super jealous of how everyone that's cooking along's kitchen is smelling right now.
How's your kitchen smelling, Anne? How's your kitchen smelling, Dave?
Amazing.
Fantastic. Super
Is it-
Dave,
excited.
are you also cooking for your family dinner tonight?
I am. We have a whole chore meal and I don't even know if I'm on for tonight, but I took it. No, I'm not. I'm not on for tonight, so I took it from my son.
I need to add others in my household to that chore.
Seriously, I never even thought of that.
Yeah, I got a 14-year-old over here who cooks amazing vegan meals on a regular basis and everything else. And yeah, we got 3 child cooks in the house. I guess one just turned 18, so he's an adult cook. And then the other 2 of us. But they're really good at it. They really, especially during COVID, everyone's gotten good at cooking.
That's awesome. I think I'm going to start implementing that in my house. I won't tell my kids where it came from. No worries, Dave.
We definitely had chore meals in my house growing up. It was definitely like, you have to make dinner once a week or something. And I would create something like insanely elaborate. And my brother would be like, cool, boxed macaroni. It's funny because now I can get my brother to cook with me. Him and his girlfriend were staying over here and I was like, come here, you're helping me with dinner. And so we made like homemade pizzas. And so we did like the whole pizza crust and all of that and mixed our yeast dough. And now it's like his favorite thing to make. He'll just bust out homemade pizza crusts wherever he is across the country, which is insane, but I'm glad that he has found something he enjoys.
That's awesome. Way better than boxed macaroni, right?
Yeah, way better than boxed macaroni. Someone asked me what part of Montana I'm from. I live on the Blackfeet reservations. I'm in the northwest part of the state. I am about 5 miles from the eastern border of Glacier National Park. So if you've been to the mountains, that's where I am.
That's beautiful country right there.
It is. So you guys are jealous of my snow. So I am going to add in my tomatoes now. I actually have this pan on a pretty low heat right now. There's just a lot of moisture in the tomatoes. Let my tomato cook for a second. We're just trying to get the tomato to the point where it's going to kind of fall apart on us. So that's where we're trying to get the tomato to. It shouldn't take very long. It should be like 5 minutes or so. If anyone's making wild rice, how's it coming? Is it cooked yet? If you're making a white rice, it's probably long since cooked.
My rice is done, but it's not wild. I could not go hand gather wild rice in Seattle, unfortunately.
My wild rice is done.
You know what? It's there's a couple awesome wild rice suppliers online, but I was like, I don't know if anyone actually went and got wild rice. But that's okay, because obviously this recipe has been made throughout India and Nepal with basmati rice for a long time. So, so I'm just letting this cook down. Tomatoes are going to get nice and tender in a second, and then when that happens, we're just going to add them right into our lentil mix. I know you guys are like, oh my gosh, Mariah, how are we going to have time to make dessert? Because I know that's your top priority right now. Depends. Do you have a coffee grinder? If you don't have a coffee grinder, a food processor probably works just fine. If you don't have a food processor, a cylindrical, like a wine glass or a cylindrical glass would work, because we're going to obliterate some sunflower seeds. I'm changing directions for a second because our food's almost ready. So just letting this, that's on low, that's on low. And we're going to make sunflower maple cookies, which is super, super, super simple. The ingredients are raw sunflower seeds, maple syrup, and a little bit of salt. So the way we do that is just turn our raw sunflower seeds into flour. And that's why I have a coffee grinder, literally just to obliterate seeds and powder. But if you don't have that, I'll show you guys how to do it. As I said, really easy. So I have one coffee grinder for seeds and I have one coffee grinder for coffee, but they've both been used for both at various times. So got my raw sunflower seeds. Sunflower seeds are awesome. Of course, they're a seed. Not a lot of people have allergies to them. But sunflowers are another great example of cool indigenous agriculture because they've been so selectively bred over multiple generations to have big edible seeds. You're not going to find wild sunflowers with big edible seeds in the wild like that. So I think sunflowers are super cool. I'm going to obliterate these, and I did send you guys a recipe for this. So my recipe is going to be like 1/4 of a cup of sunflower seed flour per person in your family, because that's the size of a cookie. About that. Also, these tomatoes are falling apart, so I'm just going to kill the heat on this, and I'm going to pour these into my lentil mixture. So many spices, so many good smells. And then I'll just give this a stir so that everything is combined. And I'm just going to let this simmer on the stove top.
I see what that looks like up close, just to see if I'm anywhere close.
For sure. Here, you know what works better? Is tour over here. There we go.
Oh, looks good.
Looks yummy.
It really does. Did you add the rice in too already?
I haven't added the rice in. It's gonna, when you serve it, just serve it over rice.
Oh, perfect. It tastes amazing.
Then,
I snuck a taste.
You're gonna end up mixing everything together. Is it good? Awesome. Cool. I'm just going to show you how to make these cookies real fast, and then I'll let you guys eat your delicious food. So only thing I'm going to need for these cookies, obviously, are my 3 ingredients, one of which is salt. And I have another little pan here and a little bit of oil. So I can use olive oil for this recipe too, because if I'm going to fry cookies, I should fry them in healthy oil, right? But if you have sunflower seed oil, that works great too. I'm going to obliterate this loud for a second. It's okay if you're doing this. It's perfectly okay to have chunks of sunflower seeds in your cookies. You just want it mostly in powder. If you don't have a coffee grinder, if you don't want to put sunflower seeds in a coffee grinder, if you don't have a food processor, take a cutting board
happening this weekend
and a rolling pin, cylindrical item, whatever it is, and just roll it across your sunflower seeds, and they'll turn into powder pretty quickly. So that'll work.
So glad you explained that, because when I saw the recipe saying or a cylindrical glass, I said, I just need Mariah to explain this to me, because I have no idea how I would do that. But thank you.
Did you get it? Did it make sense eventually?
Yeah, now it makes sense. You had to explain it for me to like, I couldn't visualize it.
Like a rolling pin.
Yeah.
Also, I realized there's a word for the thing that we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you could use a mortar and pestle. You could do that. One time I was doing a school presentation, like pre-COVID. So we had a whole bunch of things and the kids were like playing with stuff. And I just had them like obliterating a whole bunch of sunflower seeds with a mortar and pestle. And eventually I was just like, or I can show you guys how Native people are modern 21st century people that use the tools that we have access to. And one of those tools is this. And so I just blended up everything in a coffee grinder real fast. So
that's awesome.
Well, I have to say that I happen to have a very valuable Tupperware item that Alexandra gave me years ago that is extremely efficient. So thank you, Alexandra.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so glad you still use it. That makes my heart happy.
And I haven't been to a Tupperware, well, I've never been to a Tupperware party, but you know, maybe that's the next event we need to do.
I'll happily host a virtual Tupperware party for everybody, but nobody's allowed to buy anything.
It's funny, I have Tupperware like storage containers that I got that were my grandmother's, because apparently Tupperware never falls apart.
And if it ever does, you get to replace it for free, which is crazy.
And you know what? And I was like, maybe I'll test that someday, but nothing's ever fallen apart to actually test it.
That's awesome.
So I guess I'll just have Tupperware things from the 70s. Just chilling in my pantry. But they do work really great for like storing all my flour and sugar and things in. So I have a whole bunch of sunflower seed flour now. Not a whole bunch, but you guys see what I'm dealing with. And then I'm just gonna add maple syrup into this slowly until the batter mixture reaches like a wet sand type of consistency. Because we're trying to get it to the point where we can make little cookies out of it. Like little, trying to think of the right size that we're going for. Like flattened ping pong balls. That's what we're going for. Little flattened ping pong balls. Before I do that, actually, I'm gonna add like a 1/4 teaspoon of salt into this so we can mix it consistently, and then I'll add my maple syrup. I lied, my salt's on the table. All the way over here. Okay. Again, I'm not measuring anything. It's either because I know what I'm doing or I'm incredibly reckless. Which is probably both of those answers. Really excited to eat this doll in a second, but I want to get these cookies done to show you guys. So I have some maple syrup, and you know what, you're probably not going to need very much maple syrup, probably a 1/4 cup or less, but it depends on how much sunflower seeds you ground. So I'm going to drizzle a little bit in here. I did a cooking demonstration right before COVID hit up in Vermont, and they gave me like a gallon of maple syrup, and I just finished working through it. And so this was my maple syrup supply. This is what my family had in a year, which is maybe a little too much maple syrup, but there was a lot of cooking demonstrations and cooking for other people involved. So you guys can see that this mixture here, too crumbly, won't stick, needs more syrup. But now I'm really excited because I have this maple syrup from, I don't know how to say it, but it is a company from, it's the Traverse Bay Band of Odawa, I think. So it's a native made syrup. And yes, my family does love it when I have cooking demos. They're like, cool, we get food later. I sprinkled in more syrup.
I assume almond flour wouldn't work with this, would it?
I have no idea. It probably would. I would try it. It would, you know, I would try it with like a small portion and just do, you know, a 1/4 cup
see how it
of
tastes.
almond flour and, you know, a tablespoon of maple syrup or however it takes to get it to stick together, and try it. Tell me if it works. I'd be super curious. I make peanut butter cookies using peanut butter and maple syrup or maple sugar, and I've been substituting sunflower butter for those because peanuts are of course indigenous, but if you're doing school programs or stuff like that, there's a lot of peanut restrictions, and so it's just substituting sunflower butter, and that's worked out really well. So almonds should work. I'm going to heat this pan and this oil up to about medium heat. And you guys will see now, this is sticking. I could move this all around, pile it up on the side. So I'm going to make cookies out of this. And if it gets too sticky, then you add more. Actually, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grind up a little bit more sunflower flour, because right before I put it in this oil, I'm going to dunk the sides in a little bit more of the sunflower seed flour to kind of reduce the stickiness on the actual cookie itself. Piling this in a little pile on the side of my bowl. So you guys will see, I'm just trying to make them into little shapes like this. So that's what we're going for. And you can see I have some chunks of sunflower seeds in there. Gonna dunk it a little bit on both sides of the flour. And then we're gonna put these into the oil.
Curious, Mariah, what got you into cooking and getting in touch with this Indigenous cooking and IndigiKitchen?
Yeah, so I was really lucky and I got to grow up cooking. I got to experiment a lot in the kitchen. I would wake up when I was little and tell my mom that I had a dream about a recipe for cookies, and she would just let me make it, because the worst thing that happened in our world was we were out a little bit of like flour and sugar. As long as she was supervising, it was fine. So I grew up cooking a lot and experimenting and kind of having that understanding. But between going to college in New York City and coming back home and kind of realizing what this concept of living on a food desert meant, I realized that there were still lots of ways that we do have access to food that were not limited to the things that we could get at the grocery store, but all the things that we still had access to right outside the front door. So all the wild greens that grew, all the things that we could grow in the garden, all the moose meat that my cousins had stacked in our freezer. And so I started experimenting with all of those foods, and just started learning how to prepare things with the ingredients that I had available to me, because I was home from college on summer break and didn't have a car and just really wanted a salad. And so I started learning more about that, and going to food sovereignty conferences and all of that, and too hot, and really getting to experience take off the heat for a second. I have to flip these. I've got to watch them. So sorry guys, I'm getting distracted because I need to flip the cookies that I'm breaking. We're going for golden brown. One of these got a little too dark though. And the cookies are probably going to fall apart on you, and that's okay. You don't have to stay perfect circles forever. Going to food sovereignty conferences, I recognize that there are so many diet-related illnesses within Indian country, and so many of them have to do with this forced destruction of our food systems. You know, the forced removal of people away from the places our traditional foods grew, this forced dependence on government subsidized food systems. So the 18 Commissioner of Indian Affairs report wrote, "It is cheaper in the end to feed the whole flock for a year than to fight them for a week." And it was, of course, referring to the financial advantage of just forcing Native people into subsidized food systems rather than fighting us militarily on the plains. And so that was the justification for destroying the bison populations, hunting bison almost to extinction. And, you know, of course, that affected different tribes in different ways. Some tribes, of course, were had to deal with their rivers being dammed, and so that affected the fish migrations. It affected the irrigation systems that they had in place for their traditional agriculture. It affected so much. So there was a lot of that. But there is also this excitement within Indian country to create this resurgence of Indigenous food systems. And so as we work on restoring access to our traditional foods and restoring access to healthy, affordable food, and community gardens and affordable fresh deliveries in the grocery stores, we also have to work on rebuilding the knowledge around working with these foods. Because so many people have been raised in families with multiple generations of understanding of subsidized food systems, of the commodities, right? And so people grew up thinking green beans come out of a can and they're squishy and they're gross and they don't have flavor. And corn is only available in like canned sweet corn or maybe corn on the cob. And they don't have an understanding of all of these other things that you can do with corn and the ways that they were traditionally eaten. And so I'm like, well, I'm just going to start a cooking show. I'm going to call it IndigiKitchen. And someone said, okay, Mariah, sure you are. And so then I had to, then I started working with it. Someone asked me, oh, sorry. Someone asked how I'm working with language to ensure that it's passed down as the food is tied to language and the various ways it can be leveraged. Great question. I get to do some work with a couple awesome different projects. I'm not a fluent speaker, but I do work with fluent speakers on different projects. It's exciting because we're, hang with elders for sure. It's also fun because I've partnered with some elders that are sharing recipes and I'm gonna film them. So it'll be just my hands, really anonymous videos like I normally do, but it will be interspersed with them telling the story of the food and really going into those details of those super ancestral foods rather than kind of modern mashups using ancestral ingredients like I do a lot of the times. So it'll be kind of a way of cultivating that story of those foods told through language, told through the people that have really experienced those in different ways and can relate the historical details that they got from their grandparents or whatever it may be. We're also doing some fun work as well. My partner does hide tanning, and so we're doing some film projects with that where we get to basically go through the process of processing an entire animal and then going through and captioning that, going through how every part of that animal can be utilized. We're going to do it both in Blackfeet language, and he's Onondaga. He's an Onondaga language teacher. So to be able to take that single video and then to be able to caption it for different language programs. So lots of things like that. And then if you guys are familiar with the Tea Garden project that I've been really lucky to work on, we're doing lessons to teach folks within the community how to grow traditional Blackfeet teas, traditional Blackfeet tea plants, but we're making those diagrams available so it's also incorporating Blackfeet language into, you know, the stories of the plants and the ways in which those were harvested as well. So we get to have food soon.
By the way, that whole thing you just told us is amazing. I think everyone's kind of lighting up on the thing, but that's just really amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to bother you with another question. Since you're in Montana and your garden season is probably pretty short, I'm in Michigan. I have a short season, but probably not as short as yours. What do you do to have food sovereignty in the winter?
So a lot of times, you know, obviously Blackfeet diets were super seasonal based. And so our, you know, what we have access to in the summer versus what we have access to in the winter has changed a lot. So for, you know, this obviously share, save what we can. I have a lot of things put away in the freezer. Really lucky that I get to can a lot more things this year, really trying to get my garden up to full speed this year and to be able to save a lot of that. But we also, of course, have a dehydrator. It's like kind of packing away all the food that we can in the summer and the fall for the winter. And so traditionally, Blackfeet people dried a lot of things. That was the main method of preservation. So of course, you can have access to fresh meat year round. we used to dry tons and tons of berries. So we have sarvis berries here, also known as Saskatoon berries or June berries or Savis berries or service. Yeah, there's lots of names for them. And you probably have a variety of them wherever you are. But we used to dry gallons of these berries because they were used to make pemmican. They were rehydrated and made into berry soup. So they were used throughout the year. We used to dry a lot of root vegetables, so different types of tubers, wild tubers that grew and could be rehydrated. Some of them were braided like you would with like a garlic braid, and then they could be thrown into a pot and cooked like potatoes later. So it's these methods of preservation, but it's of course looking at the seasonality of things, recognizing what you have access to now, and kind of seeing, being able to think in this long-term outlook. What do I need, not just next week, but what am I going to need in 7 months that I'm not going to have access to? Right now, it's dandelion season. So we have access to fresh dandelions, and we can make dandelion fritters. We can do all of that, but we can also go harvest dandelion roots, and we can roast them and save them and make like nice roasted dandelion root tea for months. And it's kind of like a fun coffee substitute because it has that same, not quite bitter. It's like coffee, but without the bitterness, at least in my opinion. So you can do all of these other things, but it takes that thinking in the moment, but thinking for the long term.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And yes, apparently the risk of frost will never disappear.
Is there a good book that kind of talks about that, like how you can think about what's around you and the different things that are in your environment to just consider canning and whatnot? I guess there's lots of books probably about it, but that's really cool.
Yeah, there's I'm trying to, if I find the time, there's a couple books about like wild fermentation that I'm really curious about, and I haven't gotten into it hardly at all. But there's a lot of folks doing really cool work with fermented foods and wild harvested and foraged foods that can be made into, kombuchas or vinegars, or some people make home brews out of things. So I have my little dal and wild rice here. So if you guys can see that. I can't tip it too far, but I can probably tip. There we go. So there's food there. And then for dessert, we're just going to take one of our cookies and I have a couple awesome types of indigenous berries. I think Native people on North America got very lucky with the wide variety of berries that we have access to. So we have, of course, native raspberries, we have wild strawberries, we have all blueberries, which are indigenous to North America. We have obviously starburst berries, and we have cranberries, and we have huckleberries, and we have buffalo berries and elderberries, and so many types of cool berries. And I'm spending a lot more time assembling them in a pretty way than is totally necessary. There's two ways to do this. You can eat cookies with berries, or you can smash the berries and make like a berry sauce just by smashing the berries. Or you can just make cute little decorations with your cookies and your berries, and then eat them all together in one bite. So there is a delicious sunflower seed maple cookie, and we have dal and wild rice. And I'm excited for the people that cooked along. I hope that other people get a chance to try to make some of this stuff in the future. I know the link to the ingredients is there, but I can send a link to the full recipe as well, just so that's added. And thank you guys so much for listening to all my stories and rambles and sharing and all this information and being part of this cool kickstart to this event. Thank you guys. Any last questions?
I would just want to see if it's okay if those of us who cooked along shared our pictures on Twitter and mentioned you.
Yeah, share on Twitter. You can share on Instagram, whatever works.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Can I just say thank you for this? I used to study anthropology and ethnic studies and ethnographic research. And I have to admit, this is probably the most geeked out I've been ever. And I do a lot of work with Indigenous people too. And so this has just been such a unique presentation. All the work you're doing in the community, on the reservation and outside of it. And then really, I didn't even think about a food desert in that sense. And so thank you for doing this, because it's been really impactful. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for the torture of watching me make delicious food. No, but seriously, it's awesome. It's awesome to be able to use food as a vehicle to talk about so many other things, and to be able to share this cool information and, you know, create all of these tangential stories to the meals that we eat.
Awesome. And I just posted to Blackfeet and I was looking for the projects. I wanted to try to find that tea project. Is there an easy way for us to find the tea project?
Fast Blackfeet needs a new webmaster.
Okay.
This is their problem. I've been talking to him about this. I was like, they had a recent article that was in the local paper about the tea project, but they still haven't been able to update their website with it. So I know it's on their Facebook page. That the Fast Blackfeet Facebook page has a link to that and some of the work that's being done with the tea project.
Awesome, found it.
But anyone can donate through that as well, through the Fast Blackfeet page.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mariah. I'm so glad that you made time for us.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you guys for being such a great group.
Take care.
Thank you.
Enjoy food. Have a wonderful evenings. Bye-bye.
Thanks.